Welcome to today's edition of the Author's Corner, brought to you by KNEO 91.7 FM The Word. I'm Roberta Foster, and today I welcome Vonna Laue to Author's Corner. She's written the book with a very long title, by the way, Glad I Didn't Know, Lessons Learned Through Life's Challenges and Unexpected Blessings. It's published by Morgan James Faith, and she'll tell you more about how to find the book at the end of the program. I'll give you a little introduction to Vonna. She was raised in South Dakota and never imagined the opportunities that lay ahead. She received her bachelor's degree in accounting and MBA. She has been to all 50 states and 111 airports and counting as a speaker and trainer at regional and national conferences and in churches. And she writes from experience with highs and lows that life offers, both professionally and personally. She's also the co-author of the Essential Guide to Church Finance. Vonna, thank you so much for joining us today on Author's Corner.
Thanks for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
So your book highlights the unexpected and often challenging circumstances we face in life. And so what has this been like for you? Because we do know you write from experience.
Absolutely, and I don't think my life is probably any different than anyone else's. There are seasons that we go through that are challenging and difficult and sometimes traumatic. Mm-hmm. And there are other seasons that we go through that we just are able to enjoy and savor and really find ourselves in the midst of some unexpected blessings. Mm-hmm. And so this book is 32 chapters of stories of those different circumstances, and half of them are mine. Okay. And half of them are other people's that contributed, because I didn't want somebody to say, oh, that's how God worked in her life. I really wanted them to understand through the power of story that that's just how God works. And it's so exciting to see that come to life through the others that contributed, men and women, ages 22 to 88, Americans, non-Americans. It's just how God works.
Well, that's quite a diversity. So how did you find these people?
Well, I knew different people who had stories that to me were evidence of God's working in their life. Mm-hmm. And so I started just over time, as I was thinking about this project, keeping a list. And I didn't want to invite them into it and then have it take years before it came together. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't until I had an accepted book deal with Morgan James Faith that I actually reached out to them. But then when I did, to each of the people that I reached out to, I didn't ask them to write a particular story. Okay. I asked them if they would join in this project, and I laid out the idea for it. Mm-hmm. And when they would say yes, I began praying for them, and I prayed for them every day until they gave me the story. And at the same time, I was praying, okay, Lord, like, I can't have 10 cancer stories or 7 stories of people getting laid off from work. Like, this needs to work out. And as he always does, God in his providence just wove together stories beautifully. And many of them submitted stories that I expected, and some of them gave me stories that I didn't, that were just powerful. And it's really fun to see how there are stories about cancer, both survivors as well as people that lost a spouse to cancer. There are stories about coming to America, but from the perspective of a 17-year-old coming with nothing to a mining executive coming and leaving a career. I mean, just this vast array of stories, but all of them pointing to the fact that we're glad we didn't know the circumstances we were going to encounter in advance, or we would have done something that would have kept God from being able to do the amazing work that he did.
Not knowing does give God the freedom to use the twists and turns of our life in a way that will definitely benefit us. We don't necessarily like going through the hard times, and we enjoy the happy times that may still teach us a lesson. But it usually is a hard time, isn't it, that teaches us the most?
Almost always when I hear someone say, I went through this fill in the blank and learned the most or grew the most in my faith, that's almost always a difficult time. And so I do agree with that. And I've really kind of been thinking lately about the Lord promises He won't give us more than we can handle. But I think sometimes what that means is He simply doesn't let us know what's ahead. And that's the gift of grace that He gives us to make sure that He's not giving us more than what we can handle.
Yeah.
So I would fully agree with that. And yet there are also stories that are incorporated in here of blessings that we wouldn't have foreseen ourselves. So let me give you an example of that. One of the stories is that I am privileged to serve on the board of World Vision. And you, in your introduction, talked about me being from South Dakota. I am from a town of about 1,500 people. I went to a small Christian school. There were 3 in my graduating class. If you had told me 10 or 15 years ago that I was going to serve on the board of World Vision, in addition to thinking that was outlandish, I would have thought, okay, if that's true, I need this education and I need this work experience and I need to network with this person. And that's not what God intended. He simply needed me to be obedient as He led along the way. And if we only had what we have prayed for in our lives, think of the amazing blessing that we would have missed out on, because His plans really are truly higher than our plans and His thoughts higher than our thoughts. And so sometimes I feel like we're just along for the ride, and it's not just in the challenging times, it's also in those blessings that we couldn't foresee.
So today I am talking with Vonna Laue regarding her book, Glad I Didn't Know, Lessons Learned Through Life's Challenges and Unexpected Blessings, which is published by Morgan James Faith. And you're listening to Author's Corner, and I'm Roberta Foster. So in your book, you have this phrase, the pain, strain, and uncertainty were constant and sometimes extreme. What can you tell us about that?
That comes from a chapter that discusses one fall season in my life. And that year, I felt like the Lord was calling me to leave a career that I had been in for 20 years that I loved and said I would be in for my entire career. And I argued with him, and I don't know if any of your listeners have ever done that. It's not very productive. But at the end of that time, I felt that it was a matter of obedience to leave that job. And so I gave notice. I was in a career where I was supposed to give 12 months notice. I gave them 4 months notice and told them I really felt like it was a matter of obedience and would be detrimental to the organization and to our family if I didn't leave. So I was in the midst of leaving a career that I loved and not going to anything because I hadn't been called to anything, but just stepping away. The week that I made that decision, our oldest daughter, who was a high school athlete being recruited as a college athlete, had a significant injury. 2 weeks later, while she was on a recruiting trip with my husband, on crutches and going to the last 2 schools that she was looking at, I went away for the weekend with our youngest daughter, and when I came home, our house had flooded over the weekend. And we were out of the main part of our living area for 4 months, and it was a $60,000 remodel.
Wow.
And then the next month, my stepdad passed away unexpectedly. And so when I say that the pain, the strain, and the uncertainty were constant and sometimes extreme, that's what I'm talking about. But in the book and in that chapter, you'll see the lessons that came out of that and the way that God showed up and had just some really sometimes practical results from it, sometimes life-changing, life-altering decisions that were made as a result of that. And so it really is the reflection in each of those things of His hand and His guidance.
Well, you had quite a chaotic time in that year that you just told us about. And we see that when our life is in chaos, sometimes we think we're the only ones going through this. And so as people are listening to this and they might think they're the only ones, what would you say to them to help them realize they're not quite so isolated in how to deal with the situation in their life?
Well, for those who are going through that right now, know that God loves you and cares deeply, and He's not caught off guard by anything that's happening. That's my first encouragement. So it feels like life's not normal, and I can relate to that. I very much remember sitting at a stoplight years ago, my brother-in-law passing away of cancer, and looking around at every other car that was sitting at that stoplight at that moment and thinking life is normal for them. And it's not the case. There are situations that are happening in other people's lives, and we just don't understand what that is, but that doesn't make it less real for us when we're going through those challenges. And so, again, just be encouraged. You're not alone. There are others, and God is there in the midst of it. And the other side of that is for us to realize, let's look at it from the other direction. When we're sitting at a stoplight, I sometimes will just pray, Lord, there's someone here that right now feels like life isn't normal and they're going through a real challenge, and just be with them. And so I think that's an encouragement to us in our everyday life to understand that there are others that are going through pain, and we need to take and give comfort as we have the opportunity.
And one last thing, a lot of times the unknown causes us to be gripped with fear. And we tend to worry about the future, which nobody has any control over because we don't know what it is except God. And yet we worry about it instead of relinquishing that to the Lord. Give us a tip or two on how to do that.
Well, I'm going to guess that maybe I'm not the only person that likes to be in control. I recently asked an audience, when you're in a car, would you prefer to drive or prefer to ride? And nearly every hand preferred to drive. Every hand that went up was for driving. And I think that's because we want control, and that's where oftentimes worry and fear come from, because we don't specifically control a situation. When tragedy strikes, you'll often see that people respond by trying to find something or someone to blame. Because if they can blame something, it means that it wasn't because it was out of their control. It was because something else went wrong, and they should be able to fix that. So one of the things that I found over the years is that I changed the way that I responded to invitations for things. I don't make commitments. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm any less committed to doing something, but what I simply say is, I'll plan to do that. But the wording of that is different, because in my own mind, I know that I'm absolutely planning to do that. But there could be something out of my control that keeps me from doing that. So I look at that differently. And just understanding the control aspect. James 4:13 through 15 have been almost life verses for me, because it talks about, now you who thinks you're going to go into this city and you're going to conduct business and do this or that way, you don't even know what your life is. It's a mist that appears for a little while, and instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will do this or that. And that to me has been so important in that struggle with control, fear, and worry, to understand that ultimately it's the Lord's will. I don't know about you, but I go into each day and I often find that particular day doesn't even turn out like I thought it was going to. So why do I think I'm going to be able to control this year or decade or lifetime?
Wow. Well, great information and encouragement from Vonna as I'm talking to her about her book, Glad I Didn't Know, Lessons Learned Through Life's Challenges and Unexpected Blessings. And Vonna, we didn't get to talk about the effect of blessings on our life, but we'll leave that to those that will pick up your book and get a copy of that. So how can people do that?
Absolutely. Well, they can get it wherever they order their books from or their bookstore. It's available, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Amazon, any of those, and encourage you. All of the proceeds are split between World Vision and Team as a missions agency, so you're also supporting nonprofit ministries at the same time. If you want more information, you can go to gladididn'tknow.com. There's no apostrophe in it, just gladididn'tknow.com.
Fantastic. So one more time, the book is Glad I Didn't Know, with that subtitle, Lessons Learned Through Life's Challenges and Unexpected Blessings. And I've been talking with Vonna Laue, and we certainly thank Morgan James Faith for sending us a copy of the book. And Vonna, it's been a true pleasure talking with you, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Blessings on everyone.
And to our listeners, if you missed any part of today's interview or would like to hear it again, you can now find it on your favorite podcast platform or through kneo.org. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Roberta Foster on the Author's Corner. Join me again next time.